Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Pitch Perfect podcast. We're a flesh and blood podcast, and now I'm going red, that aims to educate, empower, and support the female community in flesh and blood. We're your hosts. I'm Melody, kia ora, and this is Elaine.
Hi.
And today we are very excited to have Bryan Gottlieb on the show. So, Bryan, for those of you that don't know, probably everybody does, is an amazing and knowledgeable commentator or caster for our game. And he's also a game designer for Legend Story Studios. So, kia ora and welcome, Bryan.
Thank you so much, Melody. And it's so wonderful to hear the dulcet tones of a New Zealander in my ears. I've now gotten very used to the way you speak. I understand. I don't think my pronunciation of Kiora is all that good, but I understand what you're saying and I appreciate it. And I'm very, very thankful to be on with y'all today.
Thank you. And you had some trouble, didn't you? You've got snow there.
Yeah, we've got about a foot and a half of snow outside today. I was actually, before I came on with y'all, getting together my snowboarding stuff to go bright and early in the morning tomorrow, so that'll be good. I'm scheduled to actually head back down to New Zealand
Oh,
about a week and a half from now. So next Saturday, I fly back down. Hopefully, weather will not foil me again as it did on my last trip to New Zealand. So.
was that during cyclone or was that when the flooding before that happened?
Oh, do I have a story for you? If you have time, I have a
Yes,
story for
yes,
you.
we're all for stories.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
so I go down to Auckland, and I'm there. I'm doing my work. Everything's great. I'm supposed to stay for about I think 5 weeks was my scheduled time frame, and my wife was supposed to come join me for the last 2 weeks I was there. Auckland floods, as I'm sure you well know at this point.
Hmm.
Her flight gets canceled. She can't come. We had a trip to Queens. I always confuse Queensland and
Queenstown.
Queenstown. Queenstown planned. We had to cancel that as well. But,
Oh
it
no.
happens. No big deal. And then it's time for my flight out. And the only reason I didn't stay through for the calling Auckland was because my brother's bachelor party was coming up. So I need to make it back for that. I have my flight out on Monday and the cyclone hits and my flight gets canceled on Monday. So I was like, all right, what can you do? I'll rebook for Thursday, even though his
Oh
bachelor party was
no.
starting on Wednesday. And if you have not seen the national news that my Thursday flight made, it was a 16-hour flight to nowhere in which we departed Auckland, flew about halfway across the ocean. Then there was a fire at JFK, and we turned around and came back to Auckland. So 16 hours on a plane, and I started and stopped in the same place.
I didn't hear about that. Was that even on
It
the
was
news?
it was on like I did an interview with CNN about it actually. So it was on like the U.S. news cycle. I don't know if it made it to the New Zealand news
No,
cycle.
it didn't. That's crazy.
It
So
was
I heard about that
disastrous.
I heard flight to nowhere is 16 hours. I didn't realize that you guys flew halfway and then came
Mhm.
back. I thought you were just stuck on the runway or something.
Nope. No, we were
Um
just over Honolulu when we turned around actually.
oh my
And came all
gosh.
the way back.
hmm
So when
That's
did you end up
crazy.
getting home?
I got home about a week later than I was supposed to originally. Missed the entire bachelor party.
Oh.
Had to go through like a two-step flight to. It was supposed to be a direct flight from Auckland to New York. I had to take a flight from Auckland to LA and was there for a while, and then LA to New York. So it dramatically extended my travel. So anyway, long story short, I'm hoping that my future travel to Auckland is much more seamless, and I'm hoping this snowstorm is well and gone by the point I leave in about a week and a half.
Wow.
How much time do you spend in Auckland? You live in Canada, right?
No, I'm in upstate New York, so not
Okay.
far from Canada. If you know the Albany area of upstate New York, I'm generally
Mhm.
around there.
Yeah.
And like when I go to Auckland, I tend to go for like last time I went for 5 weeks. I'll go for 4 weeks this next trip. I think my first trip was 4 weeks, so I spend like a month or so down there, trying to get it to the point where I basically split my time between New York and Auckland, and that makes for a really efficient workflow. And we're creeping ever closer to that as time goes on.
Also sounds
No,
like
does
two
oh,
really great places to split your time between.
It's, it's
And
not bad, yeah. Especially when you take into account that winter here is summer in Auckland.
mm,
Unfortunately, I mistimed a little bit.
mm.
I got all of Auckland's worst weather when I was there,
yeah.
and now I came back for the snow. So I need to do better next scheduling session.
Is this so you have do you, is your full-time role we're going to get into this a bit, but Is it all game design for LSS, or do you have? I mean, are you still casting? What do you
Still
do?
casting, still casting. You'll see me at the Pro Tour coming up in a few weeks. I'll be at
Okay,
Pro
cool.
Tour Baltimore casting. And I still have my own podcast that I host about
Mm,
magic, not flesh and blood, which has become challenging as I pay very little attention to magic these days and mostly pay attention to flesh and blood. But,
mm,
I host that with a good friend of mine, and I love getting together with him and doing that. But for the most part, the vast majority of my time at this point is committed to flesh and blood design and some other ancillary things I work on with the company.
okay. And no desire to maybe jump across the ocean and move to New Zealand, or no?
Maybe.
Mm,
From the beginning, I've always said it's something I will consider. I'm still considering it. It's tough when all of our family is here. It's such
yeah.
a long flight.
Mhm.
If it wasn't for like young kids in my family, nieces, nephews, the like, it would be a much easier decision. And also some older members of my family too, which
Mm,
is a challenging
Yeah.
balance. But maybe someday I end up there full time, and maybe even soon. I don't know. We'll figure out what works best, and then we'll just make it happen. However, it's best suited for work and personal. The
yeah.
best balance will be what we settle on.
Awesome.
Well, very nice. We're happy to have you here today. This kind of leads directly into our first question, I guess, which we just want to talk about the fact Melody and I are both fascinated by the idea that you came into Flesh and Blood, started casting for it, and now you're someone who gets to like sit at the table, right? You're in the room where it happens. You get to brainstorm these game design aspects with James White. I think it's wild to people like us who are just players casually, sometimes competitively, just have a true love for the game. So we're curious to know your backstory of Flesh and Blood. If you want to take us through your story from the beginning up to now, how you discovered Flesh and Blood, and then became a game designer now working for LSS.
Yeah, my story is a long, complex, arduous one. I try very hard to keep it condensed. If ever I'm rambling, just be like, "Shut up, Brian. That's enough. We don't care." But the condensed version, very long time ago, approximately 1994, perhaps before y'all were born. I'm not really sure, but I discovered TCGs, and of course, Magic the Gathering being the first one, fall incredibly head over heels in love with the concept, the game. Just from the beginning, it became an outsized part of my life almost instantly. But despite that, I didn't really commit to the idea of like I'm only going to be a game designer or I'm only going to play Magic professionally. I dabbled in and out with playing Magic on the Pro Tour. I went to college. I have a English degree with a film minor, and I
Oh,
did that. And then after that, I went to law school. I became a lawyer for a while. I did that. Did not love it, but all the time in the background of all this stuff, I'm playing Magic semi-competitively. Like I said, occasional Pro Tour, having fun with it, and just learning more about the game, studying the game. And at some point, I even shifted to content creation, much like yourself. I started doing articles for Star City Games. Before that, even smaller websites. I was doing my podcast, which I mentioned, and I've had a few iterations of podcasts now, but my most successful one, the Arena Decklist podcast, I did with my friend Jerry Thompson. And so the Magic writing is going really well. The Magic articles are going really well that I'm doing for Star City. And then I start covering Magic as well, again, for Star City Games, the SCG Tour. And just going fantastic. I'm having a great time. I'm loving what I'm doing. It eventually replaces lawyering for me as the thing I do full time. And somewhere on this path, I get contacted by Wizards, and they were interested in me doing some game design work for them. And a lot of my writing was very game design centric, I would say, very focused on like big picture
Hmm.
stuff, Magic, and things I thought they could do to make the game better. And for whatever reason, they found my input appealing. I did some testing. They asked me to come do some contracting on a set for them. I did. It went really well. The first Magic set I worked on was Neon Dynasty for
oh,
Kamigawa.
a
Yep.
recent one.
A recent one, yeah. So I mean,
Mm.
I worked on it a while ago now, but it's really not
Mm.
that far in the past as far as release time goes. And so I did that, and then the pandemic happened, and I
Uh,
stopped getting broadcasting jobs with Magic, and Star City Games stopped hosting Magic articles for the most part. They still do it, but they fired all of the current staff, and basically like where they had all of the top writers in the field, all of the best players in the field, they very much downsized and went with a skeleton crew, and still some very very good writers. Not to disparage anyone, but just a clear budgetary step back was their goal at
Mm-hmm.
that point in time. And at the same time, I saw Magic's competitive aspects really start to shrink. And I found myself really disillusioned with the game, the direction it was taking. And I just wasn't sure there was a place for me in Magic anymore. And at that point, I wasn't like looking to make a shift, but I started hearing these rumors off in the distance, right? And started seeing Flesh and Blood creep into my timeline. And really, for me, it was just a curiosity thing where I have played so many TCGs over my life, be they digital, cardboard, every form you can think of. I have played hundreds and hundreds of TCGs, and I'm deeply fascinated by the creation of them, how they function. And most of them, I just learn the rules. Maybe I learn the rules and don't even play, but I always learn the rules and then I move on. And I started learning Flesh and Blood. And with the exception of one hiccup, which was my first ever experience, was the Monarch Blitz decks. And I think maybe the first match of Flesh and Blood I ever played was like Prism versus Levia Monarch Blitz deck, which is not a particularly good matchup or particularly interesting. So I was like, I don't really know what's going on here. And then I saw enough in the system that I stuck through it, and I wanted to learn more, and I kept learning more. And then at some point, I was just like, no, this game is the truth. Like there's something really special going on here. Started tweeting about it. I tweeted out, kind of my short review of the game and how
Mm.
impressed I was with it. And I started acquiring cards, and I immediately put together this huge box of just like every meta deck because I wanted to learn everything about it. And I tweeted out a picture of it. And at this point, I think I ended up on James's radar. And sometime after SCG had kind of laid us all off, and I'm like, well, I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't looking for anything, but I'm just like, I wonder what I'm going to do next. And I just put out this tweet, like, anyone in the game space that's looking for help, you know, I'm available presently. And then James messaged me asking, move to New Zealand, I believe was his first question. And I was like, well, I don't know about that, but we should at least talk. We did talk. Everything went swimmingly. Like we saw things, very similarly in terms of design. I think, I kind of his vision resonated with me. I was very much on
Mm.
board with what he was trying to do. We had such a similar background. There's so many things about us that are so, like we're both vegetarians. We both came up in the same era of Magic. Like just all this stuff, we just find all this commonalities. We start talking. Soon after that, Star City signs me up to do coverage of their first event, and some of that was just like again me tweeting, "Hey, I know this game. Let me do this. I've worked with you all before." They gave me the opportunity, and then at this point, just like all the pieces were in place for me to be fully invested. And I came on to do a 1 month contract thing basically with LSS. And not the whole goal of it was just exploratory. Like, let's see if we like working with each other. Let's see if I have something to offer. Let's see if I enjoy working with you. Let's see our personalities work together. And it went amazing, just like top to bottom, amazing. Uh, we finished that 1 month contract period. James said he wanted to find a way to do this more permanently, and that's where we're at now. We're just working together happily. I seem to be taking on more and more stuff as time goes on, and I'm thrilled about it. We have such cool stuff coming down the pipeline. I'm so happy I weaseled my way into being a part of it.
Wow.
So
So, you
how
go,
long ago
Elaine.
was that? I guess I didn't realize you'd been in the design aspect for so long.
Yeah, you have to understand, Elaine, that I'm old, and when you're old, time starts to decay, and I have a very hard time like accurately placing when all of this happened. I worked on Dynasty. That was my first set, and I
Mm.
think it's now been about a year that I've been working behind the
Mm.
scenes with LSS. If it's not a year, we're getting very close to that anniversary at this point.
Okay, awesome.
And Dynasty is where you dipped your toe. So that was sort of when you were doing the initial 1 month contract and you're like, you know what? I love this. Keep
Yeah,
me on.
yeah, and yeah, a lot of it was, my first, at least my first impression of how I was going to engage with Dynasty was just to kind of consult, look over the set, give my opinions, see if there's anything useful I could add. And pretty early on, there was like some issues I saw that I thought really need to be ironed out. And I said,
Mm,
look, I don't know, how you visualize this relationship, what you visualize my input as, and if this is out of bounds, feel free to, just disregard it. But sort of like, here's how I would look to fix this. And team was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then we started working on that. And a lot of that initial work I did became Arachne. A lot of the ideas that shaped
mm.
Arachne very much had their genesis with that first collaboration. So really just strange, bizarre process. My life is this weird roller coaster that makes no sense. But I I don't know. Somehow I found my way into this dream job, and it really is a dream job. I love what I do. It's so much fun.
It is a dream job. Yes.
And I've had a
And
lot of jobs, so I should know. Like I've done enough stuff at this point where I know what actually qualifies as a dream job.
mm, you've had quite a rich background. I mean, you've been in law, you've been in all kinds of stuff, and now you're here.
Yeah, yeah, and thrilled to be here for sure.
Mm. Well, we want to dig more into what you're able to share, of course, around how the design process works. And like in the past, James has been on lots of podcasts and he's talked about given away like different snippets. He's talked about having a huge card bank that they can draw from. I think that was in an interview with Flake. We know that there were some heroes, or at least the class Assassin was pegged to be in Arcane Rising, then didn't make the cut until, like 2 years later. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. We can assume that, there's heroes, classes, there's all kinds of stuff, mechanics that are waiting in the wings that to appear. And what Elaine and I were talking about before you jumped into our interview is just like when I was thinking about it last night, I'm like the mind boggles at the sheer complexity when I'm thinking about like, you forethought and then you got to plan for this and then there's a card pool. So are you able to share as much as possible what the design process looks like? And, maybe a bit about a timeline if you're able to, just anything you can share with us. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I am happy to share, but I think you're going to find the answer somewhat frustrating. The rules around our design process is that there are no rules. Like it's just about exploration and doing what's right in the moment and staying aware of what our players are hungry for and what they want to do next and seeing where inspiration takes us, right? Like sometimes
Mm,
just sitting down with no particular goal in mind and just being like, well, where's the spark coming from? And that's one of the things I love the most, and one of the things that works for me. you know i I had general appreciation of the law, but it was so rigid and on such a ridiculous time frame. And I just don't work that way. Like I'm a creative person. I like waiting for inspiration to spark. And uh, LSS's process, as far as design goes, feels very similar to me. And that's why it was such a good fit immediately. And I know you're looking for like, well, on this date, we sit down and we have this initial planning meeting. And like that stuff does happen. There certainly
mm,
is some elements of structure, but it's not a hard and fast rule. We'll adapt on the fly. And the main thing that drives every single decision at LSS, and one of the reasons why they're such a great company to work for, is like, how do we make this game as good as possible? And like that
mhm.
seems like a starting point for every game, right? Like sure, every game is designed that way, you would expect, but it's not true. Like that's just not how games are designed. There's considerations of timing and what is right from a commercial aspect. And
Yes.
this is all meant to be in balance with you know satisfaction with the game. But with LSS, it feels like satisfaction with the game gets put so much higher than all those other aspects. It's just about making the best thing possible and doing what's right for the health and growth of the game. So that's kind of a non-answer. I understand that, but it really is a free-flowing process. And if there was any kind of deadline system that we used, I would share it with you. But there just isn't.
Mm. So I have a question, and
Sure.
I don't know if you can confirm or deny this. I think it's Bronson. He's a content creator. He's looking at the backs of the Flesh and Blood cards, and he thinks he's figured out that each set is based on, I think there's different icons or whatever on the back. Is that true? Because if that's true, I'm really interested. So you talk about it, the design process being kind of fluid and inspired. Is there sort of like a lineup of okay, in the next 2 years we want to release this set, and this set from this part of the law or whatever, or is it kind of like, okay, well, we've 12 months in advance, we know we've got to release the set, then let's figure it out on the spot, kind of thing? Like, is there that kind of planning that happens?
So there's kind of like two aspects to planning. There's like what is put forth and like on the development calendar and what we're actively working on, which is now solidified. And then there's the second mode of planning, which is this absolutely bonkers whirlwind of ideas inside James's head that is just constantly flowing and constantly swirling around
Wow.
and can manifest in any way. Like there's so many things where James and I will be having a design conversation and I'll get like struck with this idea. I'm like, oh man, it would be so cool if we do this. And he's like, oh yeah, I want to do that 3 years from now, but we'll put it in the bank for then. And like there is this very, very huge long-term plan that is absolutely in his mind, and it kind of staggers me, some of the things he knows about the world of Wraith. Like he just knows so many things where I'll be like, well, what about this? And he's like, nah, 10 years from now it'll look like this. And I'm like,
10
okay,
years from now, that is so
that
cool.
that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, so it's a combination. Like obviously there's flexibility within this whirlwind of ideas inside James's head, and
Mm,
we will adapt and do things in the right order. But there is this big overarching thread that exists probably only in his mind, maybe in some documents he has somewhere. But and I'm sure very much like Robbie Wen and the rest of creative, MJ entirely involved in that vision and have a much better idea of this stuff than I do. But to
mm.
me, it's just this like crazy whirlwind of ideas in James's brain that occasionally manifests in the form of a planner or calendar.
So,
That's awesome.
listening to you talk, I know you said you had a kind of a foot in Dynasty, but Outsiders was the first set that you worked on from like beginning to end. And you're talking about this free flowing like creative process that's happening. But how different is it, if you can speak to it, designing a supplemental set versus a draft set? Because I
Oh,
feel
it's
like that's
night
that's
and
got
day.
to be like night and day.
Mm,
So.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so a little bit about the process of like genesis of Outsiders. A lot of it was just James and I sitting in his house for a couple weeks, months, however long we were there. I don't know. Like everything kind of fades to black and you're just in this world of Outsiders. But we're just sitting at the kitchen table, talking about ideas, playing games against each other, scoping things out, and just getting to this skeleton. And that's really like
Mhm.
what design puts forth, is this skeleton that then development has to add all the meat on these bones. But yeah, getting that skeleton in the right place is extremely challenging for limited sets. It's one of the reasons why Flesh and Blood isn't just limited set, limited set, limited set. It's just resources. And thankfully,
mm,
we're getting to the point where we're going to be able to do more and more limited sets, finally breaking over to that threshold where we can do more and more limited and get more limited into the pipeline. And you'll see that in the coming years for sure. And I'm thrilled about it because I absolutely love limited. But like you said, night and day, the comparison between the two. Like a supplemental set has a lot more riffing and just like
Mhm.
see where the ideas take you. A limited set though has to have structure. You have to have rules. You have to have definitions. You have to think of, one of the things that makes me proudest about Outsiders is, and maybe this never even appears to the average player, but it should when you play it. Small consistencies that are just throughout the product, where when you pick up a card and it's only the first or second time you've seen it, it will actually behave in the way you expect it to, but you can't tell me why you expect it to behave that way. Like it just naturally works in the way that you go, oh, this interacts with this card in this fashion, and this base of, even as something, a simple example like the stealth attacks, right? All the stealth
Mhm.
attacks similarly statted. They all defend for 3, they
mm.
all 3 power, function 0 cost, and it's just consistent. So when you get a stealth attack, you know 90% of how that card works to begin with, and then you get to fill in the pieces around it. So how does
Mm.
this card now interact with Azuri? How does it interact with Arachne? And that's where the interest comes from. And you don't get bogged down in the like just understanding and having to reread every card over and over. Like putting that simplicity into the set is one of the biggest challenges about designing a limited format. And I think we did, I don't want to toot my own horn too much. It'll go back to the players and how y'all enjoy it. But I think we did a really good job with this set. I think it's a real uh, like step in a good direction for Flesh and Blood Limited.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to finally get to
Same.
play it this weekend at pre-release.
Woohoo.
Um, and like what you're talking about, I've always said that's, in my opinion, what makes Flesh and Blood like a really good game. And what I've enjoyed is just like the consistency of it and how every card feels like it's supposed to be played, and every hero and class feels like it plays like it's supposed to. And it's kind of like you said, it's hard to explain to someone, but even playing cards from Arsenal as a ranger, like all these mechanics down to how the classes function, they function and feel like they should. Which kind of leads into my next question, which is how large of a role does lore actually play when you sit down to design a set? Like, does it impact any of the actual cards, the text on the cards, their block value, attack value, cost, the way that they play, or is it more of just kind of like you guys are reaching for an overarching theme, big picture concept, and then design the cards around that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it can be either for sure. Like there's top down, bottom up design. Like those are two
Mm-hmm.
different ways of approaching it. But I know for me the vibe of whatever part of Wraith we're going to, and whatever classes we're going to be integrating into the set, that's so important to everything that I'm designing. And again, I think Outsiders is a really good hit for that. It's like the first vision that James explained to me, and like I remember the conversation vividly. This is how he explained Outsiders to me. And if you're not watching on video, I'm pulling my hood up right now, but it's just kind of like sulking in the darkness, kind of moody and separate, and a little grimy, a little dirty, a little dangerous. Like that was the entire vibe of Outsiders, and I think that permeates into so many of the cards. Things like
Oh, yes.
Bloodrout Pox. And if you saw that trailer that came out yesterday, like that is a gruesome trailer at
Hmm.
times and a brutal trailer, but like it's that's the world. That's the world we went into, the world of Outsiders, what the pits are like. And I think things like those diseases did such a good job of bringing that feeling, and even like calling out Azuri, right? Azuri is a dangerous, deceptive character, and like that is the essence of the pits. It's just a tough world, and I think the mechanics did such a good job of emphasizing that.
Yeah. I was looking at the cards last night, like the blood rock, the ones with all blood rock pox on them. Like, gross. Like, thematically, it is incredible.
Yeah,
Yep.
I filmed on Saturday a set review for Pat, the Action Point Off the Rails TCG, and we each presented like 5 cards on our own kind of theme, whatever we wanted it to be. And Pat's theme was around the artwork, like cards that kind of just like, ooh, like gruesome, grotesque cards. And when he was presenting them, I'm obviously have the cards on my screen. I'm looking at them too, so I can talk about them and stuff. But I was looking at the art of some of these cards for the first time, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the grimiest set I think we've seen. I mean, before that, I would have said Arcane, but this even tops that. It's just like, ugh.
Yeah, I can't say enough about the art direction of this set, and what the creative team did with this. Again, skeleton. Like I people always ask me like, oh, which cards did you make? And my answer is usually like none of them, because it does feel like I just lay out a skeleton and then they get built upon so
Mhm.
dramatically. And none of these cards would be anything without the development behind them and the art direction behind them. And just like the entire package is what really makes them the card. So claiming any of them as my own doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Like it's just a strange concept. But I, this set, and I know because I played this set before it had this art and this art direction, the art direction pushed it to an 11. Like it was a good, solid Flesh and Blood set before that. But what they did with, again, artistic consistency and just the
Mm,
vibe, it's such a triumph for the art direction team. And I'm so thrilled with the work they did on it.
I agree. I can't wait till this weekend. Two pre-releases for me. I was going to do a third, but I'm like, no, no, Melody, that's over the top. Then we've got, the launch next weekend at midnight at our LGS. Excited. So you've talked a little bit about challenges as a game designer. Is there any sort of, I guess, challenge that stands out to you as a game designer? The biggest one.
There's a constant desire to want to just throw everything at players at once, like every exciting
Mm.
idea, every fully fleshed out archetype. Like I just want to hand it over right away. And James is really good about slowing me down a little bit and just being like, let's pace ourselves here. We don't have to complete this archetype in this set. We build it out over time, and then it really comes to fruition. And he's right. Like you can't start at the apex of these heroes. And
Mm.
something like Arachne's introduction, I really like the way Assassin is entering Flesh and Blood. It was not all that successful in its first tournament go around. They definitely struggled in the metagame, and we expected that Arachne would struggle in the metagame for sure. It was going to take some hard work to get W's. However, Arachne did win 2 ProQuests in the hands of the same player, which was very, very
Oh, it was the same
exciting to see.
player.
Yeah,
I,
yeah, back-to-back ProQuests. So somebody
mm,
really understood the hero, really gravitated towards the hero, which was like the perfect debut for the assassin class. So cool to see someone having success with it. And now we come to Outsiders, and assassins get all of these new tools, so many different ways they can deck build, and there's more to come. There's certainly more when we revisit assassins in the future and look at other ways we can build out this kit. And that's so exciting to me, rather than just being like, here's assassin, here's
Mm.
everything you need. But I wanted to do it. I wanted to give every tool right off the bat. But I do think this is the better way to ultimately go about it.
it's pretty exciting too. Like as a player, like I not every player and fan of Flesh and Blood, I don't think, does this. But I put all my faith in you guys. That if I don't
Mm.
understand something or if I don't like something, I'm like, it'll come around eventually, right? So like a card will come out, and I'll be like, this is a bad card. This is a bad hero.
There's also just like some things should be bad. Like that is also a part of design, right? Because it's
Mm.
exciting to win with things that are underpowered, that like have the odds stacked against them. Like think about some of the heroes that have the most fanatical fan bases in Flesh and Blood. The first two that come to mind for me, the Cult of Azalea,
Mhm.
0 living legend points all time. And then Leviah is the League of Leviah is the next one up. Again, a hero with minimal living legend points, most of them gotten by Mansent. So I think using like sort of this difficulty, this hard challenge, as a way to force players to connect and bond with these heroes and to want more for them, to want to find ways for them to succeed, that's really valuable as well in my eyes.
So how much does like the general noise, complaints, moaning from players bother you? Or, and you kind of talked to this a little bit earlier about player feedback, like do you take that feedback and try to understand if there's any merit with what people are talking about?
Oh, 100% of the time. Look, there's basically only two forms of feedback that bother me. Everything else, I'm all for. I want to hear it. The only two things that occasionally get to me, uh, when people write off something LSS does as uh, thoughtless or lazy, that really bothers me. And it's not
Mhm.
that, at that point, it's not even about me. It's, I know how hard everyone on this
Mhm.
team works, and it is relentless. They do everything they possibly can to make the best game for their players. It's a singular focus, especially someone like James, who, I mean, his life is Flesh and Blood. He literally gives everything he possibly can give to the game. I don't think there's another hour in his day that he could possibly put towards this effort. So lazy is one that just completely grinds my gears. The
Mm,
other one is anything that's confrontational, or has a makes it about the person rather than decision, right? And again, I guess it's kind of the same complaint, right? Where you're insinuating someone is lazy or
mm,
stupid, then that really crosses a line for me, because at the end of the day, we're all just doing our jobs, right? Like every single person working on this game is, uh, you know, focused on making something great, but also putting food on the table for their family, and
mm.
you know, doing all the things that anyone else does when they go out to their job for the day. And then you come home and you head on over to Twitter and you're like, well, I'll just unwind a bit. And there's someone telling you how bad you are at your job. And you're like, oh
Yes.
man, I don't want to engage with this right now. But
Mm,
where it's something about the game, where it's something about the state of the metagame because of a banned and suspended decision we made, I want to hear that over and over. Like, that is invaluable information to have. And yes, you have to filter a lot of it because there is a lot
mm,
of noise. That's just the nature of online discourse. But it's still incredibly, incredibly important to how we do things. And we are constantly keeping the pulse of our players, trying to get a bead on overall sentiment and happiness. And all of that matters so, so much. To dismiss it, I think, would be a real failure as a game designer. And I never want to get to that point where I'm just like, oh, this is just noise, I'm not paying attention to it.
mm,
You have to just have a bit of a filter, understand that people can disagree with you. And that happens on the team too. Like, there's certainly cards and decisions that I don't like that Flesh and Blood has made. We all see things differently when you're dealing with something that is way more art than science, like game design. And even gameplay is very much an art in a lot of ways. There's just going to be disagreements, and embracing those different opinions, I think, is very, very net positive, as long as they're being presented in a fair and non-confrontational way. I'm always down for it.
I think as a player, like LSS is not some faceless company, right? Now we know you, we know James White, we know a lot of the people who work there and work on the sets and stuff. So I think anyone who like really pays attention to LSS, I feel like you guys really do listen to uh the complaints and the praises and just kind of what the player base wants and likes and doesn't like and I don't know. I that's another aspect that I've always really appreciated about this game. So
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we talk about this stuff all the time, literally all the time. It's such a focal point for us, and serving players is the most important thing. And look, it would be way easier to just not have like public faces and
hmm
interaction. Like, if I could just log off at the end of the day and go about my business and play some video games, unwind. That all sounds great. But the reality is, uh, putting ourselves out there as someone you can come to. Elaine or Melody, you don't like the next metagame because you think we didn't acknowledge a certain issue in the room, or you thought we really biffed it with our banned and suspended announcement. I want you to be able to come and say that to me. Like, that's really important that I be able to hear that. And it, I just think that everyone at LSS feels exactly
hmm
that way. We want to know what you're thinking. And if you start taking your game players for granted, I think you've already lost, honestly. I don't think you can make a good product anymore.
I agree.
I'm not sure I understand.
Ooh, Siri wants to interject in this one too. Um,
Oh, she
she doesn't
doesn't
understand. What can I
understand.
say? No,
We understand though. Except
that's good.
so from our understanding, like back to just kind of the core and like set designing, there's an almost computational thinking and complexity and striving to achieve a balanced set that also integrates an existing card pool, right? Because we've had sets come out and then sets new that are still coming out. So we know that prior to a set being released, there's a substantial amount of testing that's undergone by you guys in the dev team. However, there are still sometimes OP cards and dominant meta heroes, Starvo, that sneak through. So, from a game design perspective, how do you minimize these kinds of scenarios from occurring? Do you think that's even possible?
I think you can minimize it. I think you can learn from things like Starvo, think about, where that hero kind of went off the rails, reflect on how the design and development process could have looked different to try and catch that scenario before it went out the door. However, I I bet my ass it's going to happen again. It just is. Like that is the nature of game design, game development. These things are so
Hmm.
complicated, and you can invest all the time you want. And like I said, the dev team, the design team works so hard on getting this stuff right, and that wasn't any different with Starvo. The hours were there, the effort was there. It sometimes only takes missing a small interaction, a small piece of deck building to really throw things off. And that's why I say it's going to happen again at some point. But I think the most important thing is how you respond when it does happen. You don't bury your head in the sand. You don't try and skirt responsibility. You reflect back on where those mistakes come from, and you find ways to make your processes better in the future and avoid them. And I think that very much happened in the
Hmm.
aftermath of Starvo. I think it continues to happen on a set to set basis where we refine our processes, we explore more stuff. But all that being said, the mistake's going to get through again. It just is. And that's something that when it does, we'll deal with it. We have a lot of knowledge about how to operate a banned and suspended list, how long we kind of need to let things run before we have concrete data that we're willing to act on. All this stuff is stuff we're learning and developing over time. And it should be reflected in future heroes, future OP cards, and how often they arise in our
Yeah,
game.
and I don't mean to bash Starvo. I was a Starvo player, and I
Me too. There's some upside to Starvo. Like I really think there is a small amount of upside, but I will never contest that it wasn't
yeah,
way
well,
too
and I
good.
remember at Pro Tour New Jersey during the Q&A, I feel like everyone, you know, everyone was just like, "Starvo, James, like what the heck happened?" And I remember he did say, he was like, "These sets are like developed and tested so far in advance, like when Starvo was presented as a hero and we did the testing around him, like he lost to Prism, and that was before like the Briar bans and erratas and all of that, and he was like, and he lost to Briar, like he was not this super dominant hero." um and then, by the time that the set came out, all this other stuff about the meta and cards and BNR announcements had changed. um so I understand there's a lot that goes into it. I think that makes it even cooler to think about. um but at the same time, like I said, I'm not trying to bash Starvo. I really loved Starvo. Sometimes I miss him, but I've moved on.
I kind of feel that. Yeah, even just like that example of things that are happening around that sort of are harder to anticipate. Things like banned and suspended changes. I mean, that influences how we
Hmm.
think about balance at this
Right.
point now because we know that those things will be fluid. So we try to think about things in a more structural manner rather than just pure matchup data, which is still an important part of what we use to kind of assess these things. But we're every set development, we learn more and more what we can and can't rely on. And in that case, and I think an over reliance on matchup data was not helpful and led to Starville coming in a little bit hot.
I can't hear you. Okay, I guess
I was
Melody.
on
Oh,
mute.
I was like, I cannot hear what you're saying, girl.
I put myself on mute. Next question's yours.
Oh, okay. Where are we? Oh, we skipped that question. Okay, okay. All right, that.
Yep.
So I'm really curious to know, how does it feel like watching, or how did it feel watching Outsiders preview season unfold, watching, all the content creators make their content about it, seeing people's reactions for the first time when Outsiders was like the first true labor of love for you that you said you were involved with from beginning to end. How was that experience?
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Like it was so uh I honestly can't even find the words for it. Like humbling, and I was just really proud. That's the only way I can put it, is like something that we work so hard on. And I think really moved the game of Flesh and Blood forward, and to see people's reactions and how, again, the most important part of Flesh and Blood for me is how people resonate with these heroes, with these characters, and to see the excitement over Zuri's reveal or Riptide's reveal, and uh, just knowing how much these heroes mean to some people. It's like when I stopped being a lawyer, so I had sort of two phases to my
Hmm.
lawyering career. One was where I was working at a large, very, very large Wall Street firm, uh, working for some pretty, what I would define as evil clients. The second phase of my legal career was where I worked for underprivileged folks and did a lot fighting against banks who were trying to foreclose on people. So I was in
Mm.
foreclosure prevention. And at some point, when I stopped doing foreclosure prevention and like the legal services type work, I was just like, I can't do this because I don't feel like I'm actually making a difference in people's lives. Like I'm able to put in some safety gaps and like some some preventative measures, but I can't actually change this cycle that they're
Hmm.
stuck in. This like either really, really horrific poverty or really unfair systemic injustice that they're facing. I can't make a difference in it. But I wonder if like I can make a difference to more people if I just made something fun that they loved. Like that
Mm.
was what was on my mind. And back then when I made that shift, it was in the context of just like making magic content that a lot of people enjoyed. And that was good. And I got some of that. And like seeing people achieve their goals based on the back of my advice or my deck list, that was really important to me. And it did feel good. But something about this feels completely different in terms of like I feel like I'm helping create things that people legitimately love. Like I see people with flesh and blood tattoos and the people who just identify so closely with their heroes or see themselves reflected in a hero's story, and I get to be a part of that. It I feel like I'm making more of a difference now than I ever was in my legal career, which is a really, really odd discovery to have made. But that's what was really resonating to me throughout the Outsiders preview season.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's crazy. Even I'm someone who says like Flesh and Blood, like being a part of Flesh and Blood has really changed my life. Like falling in with this in love with this game really has. I was a much more like introverted person, and like just coming into this and learning to play and going to tournaments and like really finding a love for these TCGs has made me such a different person than I was even a year ago. And so I totally understand what you're saying. I think a lot of people also resonate with that. And Flesh and Blood and LSS has changed a lot of lives in a good way. I'll say that. So.
I think that's one of the things that James and I immediately connected on is because we both had that same experience in our burgeoning like magic days. Like going back to my first pro tour experiences in magic, that's what I got my first passport
Hmm.
for. I had never left America before I went to my first pro tour in the Netherlands, and now I've been, all over the world. And it's TCGs that have taken me to those places, and it's brought me to friendships with people that I never would have met. It's brought me to experiences that I never would have had. It's changed my entire worldview because it has exposed me to all these different people and cultures and
Mm.
just like different experiences than I grew up with. And it's no question I would have been a very different person without TCGs. And as soon as James was a kindred spirit in that way of thinking, I knew we were going to have a very fruitful relationship working together because that's what drives so much of Flesh and Blood. It's in the damn name, right? Like play these games in the flesh and blood,
Yes.
meet people, make these relationships. It's so critical to everything the game is. And it's not BS, man. It's 100% part of the mission, and it has changed my life for the better, just like it's changed, I'm sure, both
Yeah.
of yours.
I mean,
It has.
it
Yep.
sounds like silly to say, but like you talked about getting a passport. My first time like traveling alone was for Flesh and Blood events, and that's something I never really saw myself doing. Even I spend a lot of time in Manhattan in New York. I have like a place up there, and my sister lives there, and I never liked walking around the city alone. I like refused to do it, and even a year ago for the skirmish season that happened around this time last year, that was my first time like my family was so proud of me. Like I said, it sounds silly, but I was like, This is the only skirmish I can
No,
play
it's
in." Like,
important.
I had to like push myself out of like my comfort zone so much to like not only like navigate and walk through the city alone for the first time, but to go play in this skirmish where I didn't know anyone. It was like it was a big moment in my life, just in like the in terms of coming out of my shell and stuff, and like I wouldn't have done it if I didn't have such a love for this game. So it's cool to see how this game pushes people outside their comfort zones and develops helps them develop better as people too. It's very special.
No, 100%, 100%. And I do a good job masking it, but I very much carry that same social awkwardness and like uncomfortableness, like going into odd spaces. And the person I am in the TCG world, it doesn't always mirror the person I am in the
Hmm.
broader world, where it's harder for me to go outside my comfort zone. But TCGs feel
Yeah.
safe to me. Just something about like this community I've come up around, and sometimes I'm able to translate that into better interacting with all parts of the world. And it's really inspiring to see other people have the same experience.
Yeah. And now
We
like
need a new tagline for Flesh and Blood, changing
yeah,
lives.
changing lives. Now you get
I
to like
like it.
spend half your time in
Yeah.
New Zealand and all this crazy cool stuff.
Hmm.
All right,
Yeah.
Melody, take us away with our last serious question of the day.
All right, yeah. So we're going to spin back around and go look at your role. Talk about your role, I should say. So it sounds like you wear a couple of hats, and I'm not sure if game design specifically relates to this, but we know that you're involved with the banned and restricted, or the BNR um, releases that come out. And I'm not sure how much you can talk about the specifics of that, but what kind of work goes into the BNR list?
A lot. Uh, and from a lot of different areas as well. And a lot of people invest a lot of time in getting these decisions right. I mean, they're so important for our game. And they're hard. They're really,
Mm,
really hard to get right because everyone wants something different out of them. Like the easy ones, actually, the easiest BNRs you can ever do is when something is broken. Because it's just an obvious problem. Like there's a problem in our game, we need to fix it, we'll do this thing. Those are easy. It's these sort of this hero is just a little bit too good, or this play pattern is something that a lot of people don't enjoy, but here's this other half of the player base who really does like this play pattern.
mm,
So how do we find a sweet spot where we allow people to continue to play the heroes they love, to continue to have heroes they've invested in both emotionally and financially because they have to buy these cards? How do we get to a place where we preserve their place in the game, but also acknowledge maybe this hero is a little bit too good, maybe it's having a negative effect on the balance of our game? uh it's really, really hard. We use every conceivable piece of data we can get our hands on, be it win rate, be it attendance, be it just anything you can think of, any information that we can use to help make this decision is critical. We play a lot of games. We're talking about it well in advance of when it is scheduled to happen. It's not something that's just like, well, we better figure this out today. It's
oh
always
no.
on our mind. It's always being updated, with tournament results and player sentiment. And again, we go back to noise, right? There's a lot of
Mm,
noise around these
Yeah.
decisions too, where if you had gone back just I mean, maybe a month ago, you would think Fatigue Oldham was the only deck anyone was playing, and it was absolutely destined to take over the world, and no one would ever win a game of Flesh and Blood through damage again. Everyone was just getting fatigued forever. And look, Fatigue Oldham was fine at that point in time, but that's not even the version of Oldham people play anymore. Like it's just completely fallen out of favor. And you would have thought the world was crumbling if you had listened to sort of the discourse that was swirling around in, Facebook pages and on Twitter, on podcasts. So you have to really validate these sentiments, and that
Yes.
requires data, that requires testing, that requires work. And then there's the other wrinkle of presenting these to players so
mm.
they understand what your goals are, so they know,
Here's what I found.
some why does Siri want to get so involved in this podcast?
She wants to be in the
So
corridor.
Yeah.
they have, I don't know what I'm saying where she keeps wanting to participate, but yeah. So now I have to find my train of thought again. Communicating with players, that is a huge portion of what I've taken on in the banned and suspended announcement. That's why my
Yep.
name comes out on these announcements. It's not because I've decided to do this thing. I hope people know that's not how things work at LSS, where I'm just giving unilateral decision making power on the banned and suspended list. It's an entire team of developers and James and our OP team, and just getting absolutely everyone in a room and figuring out, again, same core principle: what is the best thing we can do for our players? How can we
Mm.
communicate with them efficiently? And that's sort of the communication aspect is the thing that I've really taken on. Although, obviously putting in input on what I would like to see happen in these things, but not anything close to unilateral input. It's something that we all work really hard on and invest a lot of time
That's
in.
always what I figured. It's actually kind of funny how, talking to people and stuff about a BNR announcement, and particularly the last one that came out, because I'd say something and they'd be like, "Oh, well, yeah, but Brian is the one who like did this." Like like it was, and I was always like, I don't think he made I think he just wrote the article. Like I don't think he was like, I'm just gonna type something up real quick and press send. And
Oh,
James
no.
didn't even look at this, and no one else looked at it. Like I don't know. Yeah, I was
Nothing
like,
at LSS
what?
happens that way. It's like a team focused environment, and we all
Mm.
take each other's input very seriously. It's one of the things about working with a group of like passionate, smart people, is that no matter what we're doing, everyone does like to have a voice and should
Mm-hmm.
have a voice. We have such smart voices in the room. You don't want to close anyone out. And it's about balancing all those things. And that's why I go back to the point of like, sometimes things will happen that I do not like. And I'll probably write the article when that thing happens, and I'll do my best to sell it on you and get the vision that the broader team had for this decision. That's what
Mm.
my role is in writing
Yeah.
those announcements.
Um.
Because there was the one that came out yesterday. There was no announcement, but you talked about the why, and I think that's what I really like. We talk about and we talk about it a lot, Elaine and I, about Flesh and Blood or LSS not being a faceless organization. Like, y'all explain. We've banned this card. This is why. This is the thinking behind it, etc., etc. I don't know
Yep.
what other TCGs do because I don't play other TCGs. I don't
Not
know if
that.
they provide that,
Not that.
or if it's just like banned, errated, done. Sorry, no explanation. We've just made this decision. Here you go. Like,
Yeah, one of the things that had started to frustrate me a lot with Magic, which was my primary game before Flesh and Blood, was how they were making these decisions. And like there was articles that accompanied things, but it often felt like they were talking around the actual issues, and sometimes they were even like sort of accusatory in their
Mhm.
tone, I found. And like the player base wants this, we don't think it's right, but we'll do it anyway. And like I don't know, I got really frustrated with a lot of their messaging behind ban and restricted. And when I found myself in a position to have some influence over how we were messaging, I pushed really hard. Not to say anyone pushed back against me, like very much this was all of LSS on board with this idea, but I
mm,
just like, I want players to know what we're thinking. I want them to know
mm,
why we're doing this. I want to have clarity around how we make these decisions. I want them to be able to have some degree of capacity to predict what we'll do in the future, how we handle these type of situations. I want there to be sort of a playbook that we use. And I hope we're starting to get to the point where we're filling that out. We can go back to something like Crown of Seeds as a point of discussion. And I think we were pretty clear with our stance on
Mhm.
Crown of Seeds. There's nobody who's at LSS who's like, I think Crown of Seeds is a bad card. We shouldn't worry about it. No, nobody thinks that. It is a very, very freaking powerful Flesh and Blood card, maybe the best card in all of Flesh and Blood. I think that's a completely fair statement. But there's a lot that goes into the decision of how we're going to let that card interact with our game. And of course, sometimes there's things that, the broader player base is not aware of yet. In this case, something like
mm.
Van Brace of Determination being a card which has a very clear
Yep.
interaction with Crown of Seeds. You just have to ask for a little bit of faith in some instances, and I think by and large we get that from players, and I'm very
Mhm.
thankful for that.
All right. Well, lastly, before we move on to maybe a few listener questions, I'm not sure how much time we have left. Sorry, listeners, we won't get to all your questions today. But one more question from Melody and I: are we allowed to know your favorite hero coming out of Outsiders?
It's Azuri by a lot, by a lot,
Oh.
for multitudinous reasons. I think she's just a badass character, first of all. And from a gameplay perspective, I joked about this. I did an interview with a Spanish Flesh and Blood site just recently, and I feel like I change my answer to what is my favorite hero all the time, and I do. I admit to that because different heroes are appealing to me at different moments, but pretty sure Zuri is my favorite hero to play in all of Flesh and Blood. That is sitting down, playing the games, getting involved in the strategic back and forth. I think
Mm.
Azuri is number one for me, and I think that people are really, really going to fall in love with that hero. It is so much fun to play, and I think so much more powerful than it's getting credit for right now. So I am curious to see that
I
develop.
think you've convinced me to try her out
Bring
at
on
pre-release. Yeah,
pre-release.
I know. I'm ready for
Yeah,
pre-release now.
absolutely.
Yeah, great hero to draft, great hero unconstructed, just all around very, very fun. So
Awesome. Because I'm
Okay.
kind of
go
curious
for it.
about this because it's something that I think about when I see cards come out during preview season. This comes from Zachary Kachi. I don't know if I'm saying that right. When design
Couchies from
Couchy,
Australia.
Zachary Couchy. Okay.
Mm.
When designing cards at the Majestic rarity, do you keep in mind the impact they would have on a limited environment because they're usually not pooled as much, or are they usually catered to constructed formats, giving their infrequency during draft?
No, we absolutely test them in limited environments. I think their impact is lessened by their infrequency, but we do want to have an estimation of how much they swing games, and it is, I think, very important to track that as well. It's more of a playground for constructed. It's where we can take those kind of shots more liberally, but 100% we are validating them within the confines of the limited spaces and want them to add something to the limited spaces as well. It should be exciting when you open a Majestic. And I think Outsiders is better at that than past sets. And I think we've continued to get better about that in future sets. So I think the Majestic slot is something we're doing a lot more within the limited space.
Awesome. I have a question from Philip, who is the founder of February. He asks, when finalizing cards to include in a set, do you have a rough goal in mind for what percentage are primarily for draft versus CC, meta versus future constructed metas versus theme?
No, no,
Okay.
there is no set percentage like we'll do X percentage of these cards.
Mhm.
We're basically trying to serve all of those things at the same time. And sometimes you put a little bit more points into one than another, but we keep all of this on our minds at all times for sure.
This
Okay.
question
Awesome.
was asked by multiple people. I believe Breezy and Molly specifically asked it. And you've talked about your love for Azuri
Mm.
already, but this is a direct quote from your Twitter. There's already a widely shared sentiment around Azuri's mechanics that caught me off guard. I'll talk more about it on a podcast at some point. So that's what the people want. Please explain.
So this may not mean a lot to y'all, but to me it was very interesting. A lot of people wanted to compare Azuri with the ninjutsu mechanic in Magic. And I don't know if you're familiar with that mechanic. Essentially, what it does is you attack with a creature. If that creature is declared not blocked, you may then pay a cost, return that creature to your hand, replace it with another creature.
Mm.
So I get where the ninjutsu comparison is coming from. However, did not cross my mind while we were designing this hero, and I was so shocked to hear that be mentioned, um, because basically everyone on the team is either a long time or a passing Magic the Gathering player, and we talk about Magic regularly. It's not something that we try and like completely separate ourselves from. We're all fans of Magic. We all appreciate everything they've done to pave the way in this space. It's not something we ever want to like disassociate from. They're the kings of the space, and for a reason. They've created an entire genre of gaming. Like we said, our lives would be completely different without.
Mm.
So it's not like we're not aware of potential comparisons to Magic. The ninjutsu one was not one that occurred to me whatsoever, though. So it's really interesting to see that be almost universally
Mm,
presented as, oh, this is what Azuri
mm.
is like.
Um,
Okay. I'm going to ask a question. Oh,
Go ahead.
or did you have another question, Elaine? Oh, it's from Anthony. So Anthony's from my local game store here in Tauranga in New Zealand. And he said top players like Michael Hamilton have said that the assassin dagger weapons are bad because they are a two cost for one damage essentially. Do you think it's too early to make assumptions, or do you agree they are well below rate? I think we've kind of talked to this, haven't we? To have trust in the future.
I think one of the things that is very interesting about the way Michael Hamilton approaches Flesh and Blood is he's extremely quantitative in his analysis.
Mm,
And that is valid. I mean, look at his results. You don't need me to tell you that the way he approaches the game is valid. It is very, very meaningful to just have bigger numbers. I think we're getting better at designing the game so it's less about those numbers. And I think Spider's Bites are a very, very good example of that. And I understand 2 for 1 doesn't check the boxes on math. Play some more against Missouri, though, and tell me what you think of Spider's Bites and how freaking annoying they are. They're so, so hard to answer. They're so difficult in what they present. And then you find yourself in just a grinder against Missouri because, okay, now you've been Spider's bitten. And here's my 3 power stealth attack. What do you do in that spot? Like you can lay down 1 attack action and block for 2 and take 1 damage from the stealth attack and whatever on hit that is carrying with it, which it often will, as stealth attacks do. You could put 3 cards in front of that stealth attack, right? To try and prevent any kind of command and conquer shenanigans that could be going on. Well, then, okay, I'll pummel over the top of that. And now you're down your entire hand. And I am going to now steamroll this game. Plus, Assassin's not horrible at pressuring deck size either. So if you want to keep committing 3 cards to my 1 attack, I'm going to start thinking about fatiguing you too, which is one of the things that Assassin is really, really good at, is start of pressuring on both these axes at the same time. Um, so I get it. I really do get it, Anthony and Michael Hamilton. I far be it to me to argue with you. I understand where you're coming from. I just think Spider's Bites more than meets the eye, more than just the 2 for 1 for sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
This one comes from Bryn from the Banished Zone. So we talked a little bit about like power creep and all of that. So she asked about that, but I found this part interesting. Do you feel pressure while designing a new set to have at least one hero become S tier? Like is there any pressure that's Fab fans need this to be impactful and change the meta for it to be considered good and exciting?
That's a really interesting question. And I think it brings some complicated answers with it. I In some ways I feel like Flesh and Blood is transitioning a little bit
Hmm.
right now away from sort of the first wave of dominant heroes. So Prism, Starvo,
Hmm.
Chain, Briar. And now, right after those heroes, I would have Oldham and I would have Icelander. While those heroes exist, the barrier to entry for these formats is just going to be higher. Those are really, really inherently powerful heroes with inherently powerful card pools. Something like the impact of Dynasty probably hit a little low for some players, and I respect and understand that. I could see wanting more out of it, but at the same time, I had some really high flavor moments, right? Some really like beautiful marvels, incredible stuff going on with the introduction of Assassin and the Emperor, and all these really, really high points for the set in terms of emotional and like flavor impact, while coming in a little bit lighter on the immediate impact. Now, that being said, I don't think we've heard the last of Dynasty whatsoever. I think there are a lot
Ooh.
of hidden powerful gems in that set, but I do think they needed time to manifest. And we're pretty cool with that. Like, we certainly do want to provide immediate excitement, immediate change to metagames. And I think maybe this go around to Outsiders, you're seeing a little bit more of that. You see a lot of excitement around a lot of the tools we put in things. Certainly Katsu getting all kinds of hype
Mm,
in terms of the power added to his kit. So I think we're hitting a little bit closer to a point where there's something for everyone in Outsiders, the people who want immediate impact, people who want that sort of slow burn. But not every set needs to come out a 10 out of 10. That's how you power creep your game into oblivion. And
mm,
there's so many TCGs that have gone that route and just escalated the stakes,
I didn't get that.
until
Could you try again?
no, I can't try again, Siri. Until there's absolutely nothing left of the game. I'm going to throw this watch across the room. Hold on. Done with this. Get out of here. You just keep escalating the stakes until it's too much and you've sort of absolutely consumed the game. If nothing else is clear from this interview, I hope it's clear that the creation of Flesh and Blood is a long-term thing. It's a long-term
Mm-hmm.
endeavor. It's a game that's designed to have legs. I know James will not rest until he gets to tell this entire story that's in his head, till he gets to go through all of this. And that's going to take a long time. And we want to be here for a long time. And what that means is some sets are going to come out lower than others and some will be higher than others. And we should be riding a cycle the whole time. They should be all over the place in terms of impact. So I do feel some of that pressure. I think it's good to push back against that pressure, though, and occasionally let expectations come down a little bit so that the game can have a long, successful, bright future.
Awesome. I,
Thank you.
yeah. I'm like, wow. Um. All right. This is gonna be a quick question, quick answer. So I think it'll be the last one that we do. But this comes from Adam D. Moonside Man, did the Ragamuffins and the Null Rune cosplay. But he just asked, which set is your favorite to draft?
Outsiders,
Yeah.
not close. And
Yeah.
I'm one of the few people who get to say that because I've drafted Outsiders. It's Outsiders by a lot. I really do love it.
Any
I hope
tips
everyone feels the same.
for
Any tips?
outsiders?
Stay open. Stay
Okay.
open. That's what I tell everyone.
Okay.
It's there's more space to stay open, and I will just giving some anecdotal experience from Outsiders Draft. I have had drafts where I did not know what class I was in after pack 1. I did not know what hero I was playing after pack 2, and still had a very, very good deck by the time pack 3 concluded. So
Whoa. It's these dual
there's
classes,
there's
right? Like
space
there's
there's
and the
space to stay
fantastic
open. Yep.
generics. Oh, I can't wait.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited. Like
All right. Well, thank you.
yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. This was great. I'm very
Sorry.
excited. For outsiders to draft it. I didn't learn how to draft on. I'm drawing a blank on the name of like the last, not before Dynasty,
Uprising.
Uprising. Thank you very much.
Uprising.
I didn't learn how to draft on Uprising, but it was the first set that I consistently drafted because it was the first draft set I was around for the premiere with. And a big complaint with Uprising, I love drafting Uprising, but a big complaint with it was that you had to pick a lane fast, right? You couldn't really stay open. Um, and so and I'm
Yep.
I mean, I'm decent at drafting it. I qualified for Nats at a draft RTN, but I'm excited to like kind of explore the staying open draft format more. I know, so I hope other people are too. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. This was a a discussion I thoroughly enjoyed. I hope that listeners enjoyed it too. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here, and yeah, thanks.
No, it's my pleasure, and thank you both for all the work you do around Flesh and Blood. It's so important that you guys are out there making content and just talking about this game that we all share and love. And I especially appreciate y'all creating spaces, for non-males in our game. It's tough. It really is tough, and it's something that I think as a game we have to work on all the time. We have to be very focused on making sure that everyone feels welcome. Gaming is for everyone for sure, and y'all are helping get that message out. The work you do is so important, and it's so empowering to see two female content creators front and center making an awesome podcast. My wife has just been learning the game recently, and
Oh,
like being able to
exciting.
point to folks like you out here putting out a podcast, that's really, really important for her. Like, it just shows that this is a space that women can excel in and succeed in. And it's so important that we have these spaces for all of our non-male players, and you have to work at it. It doesn't come naturally. So I appreciate everything
Well,
y'all are
thank you.
doing.
That means more than I
Thank
could tell you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Hmm. All right. So, are we going to ask our question?
If you would like, it's up to you're Hayden today. Wrap it up.
Yes.
I don't
Oh,
have to
that's
cut
right.
that out.
Shh, I'm not Aiden. You cut that out. So, before we wrap up, well, not usually, we always ask a question. It's the same question we ask everyone. Um, Are there any topics, content, maybe even people that you think would be great to have on our podcast in the future?
I want an outsider's review. I want to know what y'all think. I want to
Okay.
know how you feel after playing it. You can take the gloves off if there's things you hate. I want to know about that. If there's things you love, I want to know about that. Just I want to know what your pre-release experience is like, and then yeah, down the road, I want to know what it's like when you've drafted the format 500 times, however many times you're going to end up drafting it, and did we succeed in our goals of sort of opening up the draft process a little bit more, and did you find the gameplay compelling, enjoying, exciting? All those things are very, very important to me, and I would love to know what you all think of it.
Yep, we can do
Done.
that. That's
We
easy.
can
Yeah.
100%. We will 100% do
Yep.
that.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Excellent.
All
I look
right. Well,
forward to it.
thank you for being on the show. We also, Elaine,
Yeah.
I'll pass it over to you. You want to talk about socials?
Yeah, this is the part where we just give you the opportunity to plug yourself, let anyone know where they can find you. I think everyone after listening to this should know what you're doing
I,
in Flesh and Blood right now. But
Mm,
I
yeah,
would like to
hmm.
go
plug
ahead.
myself less, honestly. I wish I was harder to find these days, but if you if you would like to find me, you can go over at Twitter, which is my main social media platform, for better or for worse, at Bryan Go, BryanGo. Uh, you know, I'll be around at stuff. I'll see everyone hopefully at Pro Tour Baltimore, and if you just want to come up, chat Flesh and Blood, I've had the opportunity, be it at the banquets before the Pro Tour, or even between rounds of casting, to be able to catch up with fans between my other duties, and I find it really valuable. So please, if you want to chat about Flesh and Blood, don't hesitate to come up, say hi, and tell me whatever's on your mind.
Sounds awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Brian. Have fun in Baltimore. And will you be going to pre-release this weekend?
I will be. I finally cleared out some space in my schedule. I haven't been able to make the
Oh,
Armory lately. Been so busy, but I'm finally going to make it back to my local game store, and I hear they sold out their pre-release
Wow.
basically right away. So I'm really excited to see so many people excited to play over at Flipside Gaming in East Greenbush. I'll give them a little plug in case anyone doesn't know about
love
them.
it.
But that's where I'll be playing my pre-release on Saturday, maybe? Question mark. I think Saturday. Well,
The
I don't know.
weekend?
I'll show up. Whatever
Yeah,
day it
yeah,
is,
yeah.
I'll show up. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And ka kite.
Bye.